So there's a lot of excitement around generative AI. What do you think is the future of the interplay between what a human artist creates and what an AI system can create in Unreal Engine?
I think a lot of people in the industry are overly optimistic about the rate of progress of AI for video and other things like that. The real problem is consistency. Like spurting out an image is really high quality, but with video, over the course of seeing, all the AI approaches have consistency issues going from one place to another, and I don't think that those will just be remedied easily. Fundamentally, uh, AI just doesn't have anything resembling an understanding of the entire scene they're in, the entire arc of the movie or plot they're in, and the entirety of the world around them, and how it might affect the scene. Whereas game engines have that exactly where they need to be. And so I think what we're going to see in the space of world-class, high-quality productions isn't just everybody moves to AI and a large part of the human uh, creatives contributing to that are obsolete. I think what we're going to see is AI becoming a multiplying force on the power of human creatives, making them able to create better stuff more quickly, and with higher quality end results. And I think, unlike the fields of generative 2D art and generative text, I think the future of AI is much more complex and nuanced. And I think your interview with Mark Zuckerberg conducted in VR was a really good first example of this.
Yeah.
So you did this VR discussion. It was capturing your faces and then rendering a completely 3D computer graphics model of your faces. And then the end result was patched up by an AI image enhancer that was able to add an awful lot of the missing subtleties that are lost by normal computer graphics rendering. And that's the first step. You can imagine the output of Unreal Engine being enhanced by an AI pixel shading post processor is one thing. You can imagine creation of objects being enhanced, especially mashing up high quality objects that have already been created. Like Epic's Quixel team went around the world and scanned tens of thousands of real world objects at extremely high levels of quality. They have everything from rocks to trees to archaeological finds and so on, all captured there, and we have an awesome library of them on the Fab content site. What's missing is the ability to create arbitrary amounts of new content, and I think using data like that and AI to create completely new trees that meet your specification from all of the knowledge it has built up of high quality scan trees is going to be a really valuable thing. Um, but I don't see this reducing the need for people or the role of people. Rather, I think it actually is probably an enhancer on that. I can't help but think when I go on Amazon and Netflix to watch a movie, there's an awful lot of linear content, and most of it isn't very good because of the limitations of the media and of budgets and of other things. If we can use AI as an enhancer on that, then everybody's going to have even more opportunity than they have now, and every single technological revolution that has changed the way that people work, but it's ultimately created more opportunity for people. And there are pundits predicting that this might be the last, but I think just the opposite. I'm an optimist on this, and an optimist that it's going to create opportunity for everyone.
Do you think it will be possible to generate, use generative AI to create dynamic objects, like you mentioned, trees in the Unreal Engine world, so create meshes and textures and empower the creator to create faster, use meta knobs like hyperparameters versus very nuanced, where you can control much faster the look of a face, the look of a tree, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think that's the central challenge of the next decade of game engines and AI for content creation of all sorts. Because you have two very different models of the world that are emerging. There's the scene graph, the technical term we use to describe the set of all of the objects in the world in a 3D world maintained by Unreal Engine or another engine. Um, so in the videos you saw, it's the rocks and the trees and the snow and the bridge and the people and all of these things. And each one has enormous amounts of data attached to it. Some are like texture maps, some are sound files, some are animation files. And enormous amounts of detail, all stored there in that procedural in this precise computer graphics representation that enables rendering it from any perspective with any settings and so on. It's a completely general system that has complete context about the state of the world at any point, and so you can always precisely reproduce it. If you play the same scene 10 times in a row, it's always the same. It's never randomly changing. You're like, "Oh, no, why did that this character's face change
Yeah.
midstream?" Eh, but it's also, rather limited because you have to build everything manually, and it's costly, and it's time-consuming, and it requires expertise. And then you have this other model of the world, which is what AI sees or thinks. If we could peer into what's really happening in its parameters, there's something like the mushy connections of neurons in a brain. It has a vast amount of knowledge about the world and about graphics and about images and about people and about everything else. It's stored in a human incomprehensible form, but it can be extracted through queries like asking it to produce an image from a prompt or a video from a prompt or whatever. But the huge problem with that is it's very mushy data. We don't know how to give it a command that will give us a precise result. And if it produces one image one time and we change our prompt slightly, it might produce something completely different. We are unable to art direct it. And so it's this completely untamed tool. And I think, when we figure out more and more ways to merge these and connect these two together, you can imagine AI enhancing the process of content creation in a traditional scene representation. You can imagine the scene representation being shared with the AI, so the AI not only sees a prompt, but also here's a list of all of the objects in the world and their characteristics and so on. It can learn more about how those objects should move and interact. And so if you get a constant feedback cycle going back and forth between an engine and AI, and I think you can get the best of both worlds, stable scenes, but also the higher productivity of being able to get content out and the ability to select specific parts of it and art direct those. And to have those art directions stick and be recognized as part of this permanent scene representation.
Yeah, I can't wait until AI can operate not in the space of pixels, but in the space of scene graphs. Creating
Yeah.
objects in the scene graph, whether it's like you mentioned, audio or any of the things that you mentioned about that empower the creator. Yeah, that's a super exciting future. I wonder if you could speak to a fear that people have on this topic of artists, engineers, fear losing their jobs, being replaced by AI. Are there words of hope that you can offer them?
This is certainly the most extreme example of it because AI is just so far ahead of prior technologies, but similar fears were had in every other industry. There's a fear that digital music synthesis would obsolete musicians, and there's a very brief period of time in which songs with digital music instruments, like the early Mini Moogs and Yamaha synthesizers, weren't
Yeah.
allowed to win certain music industry awards because they weren't considered real music. Um, and then, over time, the people were educated and realized, oh, these are just instruments people are playing, and they're controlling them the same way they did before. There's similar questions about is computer art built in Photoshop really art, uh, or is it just goofy computer stuff? And I think nowadays digital artists have gained respect. And I think if you look at just the tools that have existed in Photoshop, some of them are pretty sophisticated. And nowadays they have AI features, but I think AI is ultimately going to be another tool in the artist's tool set. And I think it's going to become a more powerful, directable, and human-serving tool in the future. And I think a lot of the alienation comes from the prompt either being immensely powerful at giving you an entire creation, but then being completely unwilling to let you control the nuances of it. That feels alienating. You give it an image, but you're like, you know, replace this part of it with this thing, or make that object green, and it just it can't do it. Often it can't be convinced with any number of words in the
Yeah.
prompt, and that makes it feel like the computer is taking control away from
Yeah.
us, humans and artists, and is refusing to do what we want and has its own opinions. Right? It feels like a competitor. Where I think when we have much, much, much more nuanced control of it, and artists can go in and just, let's enhance this object, do this, do that, do that. They'll feel it's some of the tools that exist in Photoshop, which are in some ways compared to a paintbrush are superpowers already. AI will come to feel like that too, and will increasingly serve creators creating and enhancing a work in a way that feels just a natural extension of their own bodies and minds.
And of course, there is a real human pain to layoffs, and there is a hype around AI, and then companies might try to implement AI systems, and in so doing, lay off a bunch of folks, and that the pain that those folks feel is real. I think there's always going to be pain with these kinds of transformation that's happening, and it's a terrible pain. Pain in general in the human experience is terrible. But I think I'm personally excited by the human AI collaboration as you described in this whole process. So I think if you just keep being open to using the tools, constantly trying the cutting edge tools, how they can make you more productive, how can they empower you as a creator, as an artist, or as an engineer, uh, I think you're going to just keep winning.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of complicated trends underway, and it can be hard to break them down and distinguish them. I think a lot of people, like, the theories that get the biggest traction on social media often don't capture the real underlying motive forces at play there. But yeah, I think AI involved in code production will probably create a net benefit for the need for humanity to be involved in coding. It may change parts of jobs. I don't think it's going to obsolete anybody who's willing to learn new ways of doing things. And it's always been this way. And I think that there's also a lot of overhype in AI. AI is really great at spewing out code that does something that a million GitHub repositories already do because it's kind of learned the underlying pattern. It's notoriously hard to get to do something new. It hasn't been done before, especially when it's a complex task. And the bigger amount of code you ask AI for, the more it leaves you with just a massive code that sort of works, right? And that's the problem with code. It like 99% works, but the 1%, it might be harder to get to 100% with AI than with hand coding. And everybody who's looking at this topic should actually try using the coding assistants on hard problems and see how they do there.
Yeah, I think for me personally, it makes it more fun and faster to generate boilerplate code. So I can focus on the harder decisions, harder big picture decisions, and harder innovative decisions, and all that kind of stuff. And just makes programming more fun for me because I feel less lonely.
Yeah.
I have like even when it gives the wrong code, I can like, oh, okay, well, that's a way to do it. That's interesting, and then you could talk to it. Uh, maybe
Yeah.
that shows something about the programming experience that it is in part sometimes a bit lonely.
The topic of boilerplate code is an interesting one because, like, the mere existence of boilerplate code is a failure of programming language and of the idea of creating software modules, right? You ask AI to create a sorting function, great. Now you have another sorting function that might be buggy alongside the million others that different people have written. It would be better to have a sorting function that's been written and tested and optimized and everybody relies on it. And more modular software, I think, will actually reduce the opportunity of AI because people doing programming work will largely be solving unique problems. They're actually hard problems in themselves and not just connecting other widgets.
Yeah, I think as in many cases, AI will just help improve the human systems by shining a mirror to ourselves.